So, firstly, I must ask you how it is coming back to Oxford.
Well, it's great coming back to Oxford and see my daughter play in the orchestra, and also my family still live here.
All right.
And I grew up here as well as actually being a student here.
Yes.
I was a chorister here at New College when I was a boy, and then came back as an undergraduate.
Yes.
So I do revisit Oxford quite a lot.
So a very important place to you in your life.
Yes, it is, and I've experienced it at very different times of my life.
Yes.
And I'm probably one of the few people who was a townie here as well as a gownie.
Oh, right, yes.
Often people who live here go to Cambridge.
Yes.
And vice versa. But actually I did come to the university in my hometown. So I think I've experienced it in many different ways over the years.
So you didn't fancy the other side then?
Well, I think at the time there was one particular tutor I wanted to study with here at Oxford, and that's where he was, and so I chose it for that reason.
Fantastic. Well, let's talk about Story of Music.
Yes.
Those people haven't seen it yet. Let's just have a brief summary of what it's about.
Well, the attempt is to try in just 6 programs to take the viewer on a journey from the sort of beginnings of music, I suppose, bone flutes in caves 40,000 years ago, to the present day, but not to try and be comprehensive. It's not an encyclopedia of music. We don't tick every box. What we're trying to do is find a route through so that the music lover, who may not have a music degree or have done music A-level, can get some kind of context for the music that they love and where it all fits together. And one of the reasons I felt I wanted to do it was because I felt that often the way we have in the past taught music history and the terminology of it and the categorization of different periods has often been more unhelpful than helpful.
Yes.
And I wanted to do away with these terms like classical, baroque, Renaissance, because with respect to music, they're not in fact very helpful terms. So I really wanted to describe what was happening to music over that period. And my guiding line through this very long period from 40,000 BC to the present day was to say what changed and when a change took place, how it took place, who was involved, and what happened next. And so there are lots of composers. People keep coming up to me and saying, why didn't you include more about Bruckner? Why is there more about Lassus? And the fact is that if composers come along in a period where there's relative consolidation, where things are going on roughly the same as they were before, it may be very beautiful music, but if it's not a period of great change, I tended to prioritize periods of change and ideas of change as well. So when we come to the 20th century, where there's an enormous proliferation of genres and styles, really a bewildering amount, what I was really looking at is what are the themes, what are the big issues that have affected music, that have changed the way music is received, the way it's written and enjoyed. So of course things like recording, which affect all forms of music, would become a big issue in the 20th century, rather than my trying to say, I think this music's better than this music. I'm really just trying to say to people, this is how it's unfolded. And these are the tools that musicians from lots of different backgrounds and places have found these tools and made them work for themselves. And it's those tools and techniques that I was interested in showing.
Fantastic. Well, so you're saying that your narrative is about change, evolution, progression. I mean, are there any other ways in which you try to make your own story individual?
Well, I think that in the past, a lot of music histories have been for people who already know quite a lot.
Yes.
They kind of assume you know what a sonata is, or what a triad is.
Yes.
And I was very keen that this time, the idea that it should be for someone who maybe likes music a great deal but doesn't know all that, this would be a way in. And certainly the reception I've got from people, as far as I can make out, seems to be that the people who have got most out of it are those exact target people, which are the people who feel they wanted to know more about music but were slightly scared of the whole terminology and the fact they felt perhaps a little bit left out of the training. And I've really tried to welcome them back in, because there's nothing about the music that's inherently scary.
No,
it's actually often the things that go with it that people are confused by. And it's true that knowing something about a work of art doesn't necessarily make it more enjoyable, but it may be a more enriched experience if you know how it fits into the pattern. And, you know, anybody else could do a history of music where they would pick a different route through the labyrinth. And it's also important to say that although I've taken a chronological journey from a long time ago to the present day, in fact, That's not to say that everything leads from something very simple to something very complicated, or that everything has always got better. That's also not the case. What I've tried to show is that each period, each era tries to find its way with different techniques and tools, but that when a technique has been developed, it generally stays there. It's part of the toolbox. And we now, in the 20th century, in the late 20th century and early 21st century, we now have this vast array of styles and genres and techniques to choose from. And the process of the mixing and the interweaving of styles and ideas is continuing at a great pace as we live now.
Absolutely. So where do you strike that balance then between aiming for musicians and non-musicians? I mean, how do you try to explain?
Well, I suppose one way I do it is that the program makers I make the program with are music lovers, but they're not experts.
No.
And so the way it works is I'll say, I fancy explaining this, and they'll say, well, show us how you would do that. And I would say to the director, well, I want to explain it by doing this, 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 and this, and they would say, I still don't get it. Now do it again. So I'm using my colleagues in TV as a sort of sounding board to try and carve out, if I were a viewer, what would I be thinking at this point? It's true that certain people watching it who already know a great deal might be frustrated at the pace I go, or they might be frustrated because I miss things out, or they might be frustrated because they want me to go another layer deeper. And I do get letters and emails from people saying, why didn't you mention that this very complicated issue has a different layer to it? I cannot possibly include everything.
No.
6 programs to do such a vast amount of music. I have to make decisions that take the broad viewer from start to finish. And it's very important to me that I don't also treat the broad viewer as a half-wit. That they're not, just because they don't know necessarily about musical terminology doesn't mean they're also stupid. It's very important to say to people, you know, I accept you are intelligent adults, mostly, but I'm not going to treat you, it's not going to be a noddy history of music. That's my approach. Whether I succeed or fail, other people have to decide.
Well, finally, I know this is something that you tweeted about fairly recently. The Education Minister recently said that it was the more academic subjects in schools and colleges that led to the top universities. Well, we would be very strongly inclined to disagree.
Yes, and actually history really is on the way to that argument because, you know, the Greeks were really sort of invented modern education, felt music was a very important part of developing the human being and their brain. And we now know from cognitive science over the last 25 years that the development of the brain is very entwined with the development of music. And if you study music as a child, that helps your brain wire in a more dynamic way. So even on the basic level of educational attainment, it's wrong not to include music. But the other side of it is that music is something creative, and it's incredibly important for us as human beings, as a society, to be and to encourage creativity.
Well, I mean, you know, music isn't exactly going to cure a disease, but we can do something to help.
Yes, and you know, you never know, it might one day.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you, Annabelle.